December 1885. Millstone Creek, Wyoming Territory. Two small faces pressed against frosted glass, breath fogging the window in rhythm. Sam and Sophie Crawford, 7 years old and mirror images of each other, watched the Miller family across the dirt street hall in a towering spruce. Mr. Miller laughed as the top branches caught on the door frame. Mrs. Miller clapped her hands. 3 children danced around the tree like it was already decorated. Inside Ethan Crawford's cabin, 1 lamp burned. The fire in the stone hearth had burned low. Cold seeped through gaps in the board walls. Ethan stood in the doorway between the main room and his carpentry workshop, watching his children watch others. His tools hung silent on the wall behind him. No orders this week. None last week either. Winter meant no building. No building meant no money. He'd counted the coins in the tin box that morning. 17 cents. Enough for flour. Maybe lard if he bargained. Not enough for a tree. Sophie lifted one small hand and traced a tree shape in the frost. Her finger left a clear line through the ice crystals. Sam leaned his forehead against the glass. Maybe next year, Papa, Sam whispered. The words hit Ethan like a fist to the chest. He turned away so they wouldn't see his face, crossed to the hearth, and added the last log from the pile. 2 more weeks until a possible repair job at the church. The twins needed shoes more than trees. Sophie's toes were already pushing through the leather. He'd failed them. Not dramatically. Not in one terrible moment. Just day after day of not enough. Not enough food. Not enough warmth. Not enough joy. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah would have made Christmas from nothing. From pine branches and dried berries and songs. But Sarah had been gone 3 years now. Buried on the hill outside town next to the baby boy who'd taken her with him. Sophie turned from the window. Her face was solemn. Too old for 7. Papa, why doesn't Christmas come to poor people? Ethan had no answer. He crossed the room and pulled them both close. They fit under his arms, small and warm and trusting. Through the window, the Miller family's celebration continued. Lantern light spilled onto the snow. Someone was singing. Here, silence. 1 lamp, bare walls, the smell of sawdust and cold. Come on, Ethan said, voice rough. Let's see what we can make for supper. But he stood there a moment longer, the 3 of them at the window together, looking out at a celebration they couldn't join. Monday morning, the knock startled Ethan from his account books. He wasn't expecting anyone. Nobody came to see them anymore. He opened the door and stopped. Margaret Hartley stood on his porch, holding a pine tree. It wasn't large, maybe 4 feet, roots still wrapped in burlap. But it was real and green and smelled like the forest. She had a wooden crate balanced on her hip, and through the slats, he could see glass ornaments catching the morning light. Mr. Crawford, she said. Her breath made clouds in the cold air. I need carpentry lessons. Ethan stared. Margaret Hartley was the banker's daughter. Her father owned half of Millstone Creek and held mortgages on the other half. She wore a fine wool coat with brass buttons. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a hat that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month. Ma'am, my father wants library shelves built in his study. I should learn the trade. She shifted the crate. This is advance payment. Behind Ethan, small footsteps. Sophie appeared at his elbow. Then Sam. They stared at the tree like it was lit from within. Ethan looked at Margaret Hartley. Really looked. Her hands trembled slightly despite her steady voice. Her eyes moved from his face to the children and back. And there was something in them, something lonely and determined, and slightly afraid. She was lying. She didn't need carpentry lessons. Everyone in Millstone knew she spent her days in her father's library, reading books most men couldn't understand. She'd turned down 3 suitors this year. The town whispered about her. But the twins' faces had transformed. Sophie's mouth hung open. Sam had gripped the doorframe like he needed support. Fair trade. Miss Hartley, Ethan said quietly. He stepped aside. Margaret entered, and the pine scent filled the cabin like a blessing. Sophie touched one branch with reverent fingers. "It's real," she whispered. "Of course it's real." Margaret set down the crate and knelt to Sophie's level. Her fine skirt spread across the rough floorboards. "Would you like to help me carry it inside properly?" Sam had already grabbed one side of the burlap root. Ball. Together. They maneuvered it to the corner by the window. Margaret opened the crate and lifted out the first ornament, a tiny silver bell. "Will you stay and help us decorate?" Sam asked. Margaret looked at Ethan. He saw the question in her eyes. The permission she was asking for, the hope she was trying to hide. He nodded. "I'd be honored," Margaret said. And her voice carried more weight than the simple words deserved. They hung the ornaments one by one. Each placement became a small ceremony. Sophie insisted the silver bell go on the highest branch she could reach. Sam chose a red glass ball for the center. Margaret told them stories about each ornament. This one came from Denver. That one was made by a glass blower in St. Louis. The cabin transformed. Ethan stood back and watched light catch in the glass, watched his children's faces glow brighter than the ornaments. When the last decoration was hung, Margaret turned to him. "Now then, about those carpentry lessons." She was giving him an out, a way to accept her gift without losing his dignity. Ethan gestured to his workshop. "I'll show you basic joinery." They stood at his workbench while the twins played with pine needles that had fallen from the tree. Margaret asked questions about wood grain and saw angles. Her hands were soft, unpracticed. She held the saw awkwardly, but she listened with complete attention, and Ethan found himself explaining techniques he hadn't articulated in years. "Your wife," Margaret said quietly, eyes on the board she was attempting to plane. The children mentioned her. "Sarah, 3 years ago. Complications with childbirth. I'm sorry." She would have made Christmas from nothing. Ethan said, "From pine branches and dried berries." She had that gift, making joy from whatever was at hand. Margaret's hands stilled on the plane. "My mother died when I was 12. She used to read to me, poetry, philosophy, novels. My father called it impractical. He buys me books now to humor me, but no one discusses them." There was a crack in her voice, quickly covered. Ethan looked at this woman, fine dress, educated voice, money enough for 1,000 trees, and saw loneliness as deep as his own, different in shape, but just as real. Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Miss Margaret, can you read to us? Papa tries, but he's so tired." Margaret glanced at Ethan. He nodded. She knelt on the floor with the twins, fine skirt spreading around her, and opened their tattered primer. Her voice transformed the simple words into something beautiful. Sam leaned against her shoulder. Sophie played with the lace on Margaret's cuff. Ethan's hands paused on his saw. He watched this woman give his children something he couldn't patient. Joyful instruction. Watched them absorb her attention like plants turning towards sun. When the lesson ended, Margaret stood and smoothed her skirt. "Mr. Crawford, I have a proposal. 3 afternoons each week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. You teach me carpentry while the children are present. I'll help them with their letters. Fair trade. Miss Hartley." "Margaret, please. Margaret." The name felt intimate in his mouth. "You don't need carpentry lessons." "No." She met his eyes steadily. "But I do need this. Whatever this is. Fair trade." Ethan thought of pride, thought of Sophie's toes pushing through worn shoes, thought of Sam's hunger for learning and his own exhaustion trying to provide it alone, thought of this cabin filling with pine scent and Margaret's voice reading poetry. "Fair trade," he said, after she left. Sophie climbed into his lap. "Papa, I like Miss Margaret. She smells like books and cinnamon. Can she come back through the window?" Ethan watched Margaret's figure move down the street toward her father's mansion on the hill. The decorated tree stood in the corner. Their first in 3 years. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "She can come back." December unfolded. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. Margaret arrived mid-morning and stayed until the winter sun slanted low through the western window. The carpentry lessons became a gentle fiction they both maintained. Margaret held boards while Ethan demonstrated saw strokes. She asked basic questions about wood grain and joint angles. Her hands remained unpracticed, but she tried with earnest concentration that made Ethan's chest tight. Meanwhile, the real work happened. Margaret brought primers and slates and sticks of chalk. She spread them across Ethan's scarred kitchen table and transformed it into a schoolroom. Sam struggled with letters, forming them backward and getting frustrated. Margaret invented games hunt for the letter A in this passage. Draw B in the air with your whole arm. Sing the alphabet to a marching rhythm. Sophie devoured everything. Margaret brought Little Women and read aloud while Ethan planed boards in the workshop, her voice carrying through the open door. He found his hands growing steadier at the sound of it. Found himself listening more than working. Margaret started arriving with fresh bread. "For practice," she said. "For when I have my own household." She mended their curtains. "Sewing practice?" She brought a ham one Thursday. My father bought too much. Ethan repaired the loose rail on her father's porch. Demonstrated dovetail joints using her father's broken desk drawer. Fixed the church pews to show her how to assess structural damage. They were courting through practical service. Both knew it. Neither said it. The town noticed. Ethan heard the whispers at the general store. Mrs. Henderson behind her hand to Mrs. Pyle. That Hartley girl, spending time at the Crawford place. Unchaperoned, with just those children. Mr. Greaves, loading supplies. Crawford's got ambitions above his station. Seems to me. Ethan went silent and finished his shopping. Walked home with the words lodged in his chest like splinters. That evening, Sophie read an entire page without help. Sam solved 3 arithmetic problems Margaret had written on his slate. The cabin smelled like pine and bread and lamp oil. Ethan pulled out paper and wrote, "Dear Miss Hartley, for your own good." He stopped. Through the workshop door. He could see the decorated tree, could see Sam's slate covered in careful numbers, could hear Sophie in the loft, sounding out words from the primer before sleep. He crumpled the note, fed it to the fire. He was being selfish. He knew it. Margaret's reputation was being compromised by proximity to his poverty. But Sophie was reading full sentences now. Sam's letters no longer went backward. The cabin felt like something more than shelter. He couldn't give it up. Not yet. God forgive him. Not yet. The blizzard hit on a Thursday in mid-December. Margaret had arrived before the snow started. But by afternoon the world had disappeared into white. "I should go," Margaret said, looking at the window. Nothing visible beyond the glass except horizontal snow. "You'll freeze before you reach Main Street." Ethan added wood to the fire. "The storm will pass by morning." The twins were delighted. "Miss Margaret is staying for supper." Supper was thin stew, stretched. Ethan ladled small portions into their bowls and tried not to watch Margaret's face. But she ate without comment, and afterward she washed the bowls at the basin while he settled the twins in their loft. Then it was just the two of them. The fire. The blizzard howling outside. Margaret wrapped in Sarah's old shawl because the cabin was drafty despite the fire. The intimacy was almost unbearable. They sat in the chairs by the hearth. Margaret's fine boots were drying by the fire. Her hair had come partially unpinned, dark strands curling at her neck. "Tell me about your suitors," Ethan said. "The ones you rejected." Margaret laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Harrison Mitchell told me I was pretty when I kept quiet. Charles Freeman said education in women led to hysteria. Judge Preston's son, the one arriving for Christmas, sent me a letter explaining that his wife would have no need of books because she'd be too busy with domestic duties." "Fools," Ethan said. "Perhaps, but they're suitable fools. They have money and prospects and reputations. She pulled the shawl tighter. I have 30 books in my room. Ethan. Beautiful books. And no one to discuss them with. I'm surrounded by people and utterly starved for conversation that matters. She looked at him then, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You think I'm teaching your children. But they're teaching me what it feels like to be needed for something real. Not my father's money. Not my potential connections. Just me. Ethan's throat closed. Every man who courts you is a fool. You have the rarest thing, a mind that seeks and a heart that gives. Sarah had that. I thought I'd never see it again. The words hung between them. Margaret's breath caught from the loft. Sophie cried out in her sleep. Margaret stood immediately, crossed to the ladder, climbed up. Ethan heard her voice, soft and soothing, heard Sophie's mumble of response, heard the rustle of blankets being tucked. When Margaret climbed back down, Ethan was standing. They faced each other across the small room, the fire cast shadows that made the moment feel suspended, outside of time. Ethan. He stepped back. I'll make a pallet by the fire. You take my bed. Something died in her eyes. She nodded. But at his bedroom door, she turned. Thank you for tonight. For letting me stay. For... She didn't finish. Closed the door softly. Ethan lay by the fire and listened to the blizzard and knew he was in love with someone utterly beyond his reach. Someone who deserved more than a poor carpenter with 2 children and 17 cents to his name. By morning, the snow had stopped. The world was white and clean and impossibly beautiful. Margaret left without meeting his eyes. Ethan watched her walk toward the mansion on the hill and felt the distance between them like a physical thing. December 20th. The summons came via a boy from the bank. Mr. Hartley requested Mr. Crawford's presence at his earliest convenience. Ethan knew what it meant. He dressed in his only good shirt and walked to the bank building on Main Street. James Hartley's office was warm, well-appointed, intimidating. Hartley sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He didn't invite Ethan to sit. Mr. Crawford, I appreciate your instruction of my daughter. It ends now. Ethan kept his face neutral. Sir, don't play stupid. Half the town is gossiping about Margaret's visits to your home. I will not have her reputation compromised by proximity to poverty. Hartley's voice was cold. Factual. Judge Preston's son arrives Christmas week. Suitable match. Good family. You'll cease contact. I've done nothing dishonorable. Your existence is dishonorable to her prospects. Hartley stood. I don't blame you. Crawford, you saw an opportunity, but it ends today. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to rage, wanted to throw Hartley's class prejudice in his face. But beneath the anger was something worse, the terrible knowledge that Hartley was right. He couldn't give Margaret what she deserved, couldn't offer her security or comfort or a life free from struggle. His love was selfish. Understood, Ethan said quietly. He left without another word. That afternoon, Margaret arrived as usual. Ethan met her at the door, standing in the frame to block her entrance. Miss Hartley, I think we've concluded our arrangement. The twins read well now. You've been generous. Thank you. Margaret went very still. Ethan. Mr. Crawford, ma'am. Best for everyone. Behind him, Sophie began to cry. Sam's voice, breaking, Did we do something wrong? Margaret's face drained of color. My father spoke to you. Ethan said nothing. The silence was confirmation enough. I see. Margaret's voice shook. She straightened her shoulders. Thank you for the carpentry instruction, Mr. Crawford. I appreciate your time. She turned and walked away. Didn't run, didn't look back. Just walked with her spine straight and her head high, and Ethan watched her go and hated himself. Sophie's crying turned to sobs. Sam stood frozen, face white. Ethan knelt and pulled them both close. "Papa, why?" Sophie's voice was muffled against his shirt. "Because we're poor. Because I have nothing to offer her. Because loving someone doesn't make you worthy of them. It's complicated, sweetheart." "Is it because we're poor?" Sam asked. Ethan's heart shattered. "No. It's because It's just complicated." But Sam was 7 and sharp and saw right through him. The boy pulled away and climbed to the loft without another word. That night, Ethan stood by the tree Margaret had brought and wanted to tear it down, wanted to throw every ornament into the fire. Instead, he touched one branch gently and let himself break. Christmas Eve. Silent night. Holy night. The cabin felt empty despite the three of them being there. Sophie and Sam had barely spoken in 4 days. They moved like small ghosts, pale and subdued. Ethan had tried to buy gifts. He'd walked to the general store with his 17 cents and stood in front of the candy display until Mr. Greaves asked if he needed help. He'd bought 2 peppermint sticks and walked home with them burning a hole in his pocket. He wrapped them in brown paper, set them under the tree. They looked pathetic. Sophie made supper she'd learned from watching Margaret. The stew was thin but edible. They ate in silence. After, Sophie asked the question Ethan had been dreading. "Is Miss Margaret coming for Christmas?" "No, sweetheart. Because we're poor." Sam said, "Not a question." A statement of fact from a 7-year-old who'd learned too much too fast. Ethan had no answer. He pulled them close and held them while they didn't cry, which was somehow worse than if they had. After they climbed to the loft, Ethan sat by the tree. The ornaments caught lamplight and threw it back in fractured pieces. He thought of Margaret reading to the twins, Margaret kneading bread at his table, Margaret wrapped in Sarah's shawl, firelight on her face, saying, "I'm starved for something real." Sarah, he thought. I'm failing them. They need more than I can give. They need her. A knock at the door. Ethan stood, confused. It was past 9. Christmas Eve. Who would he open the door? Margaret stood in the snow, no coat over her fine dress, shivering. Her hair unpinned, falling around her shoulders, her eyes fierce and bright and terrified. "I don't care what my father said." Her voice shook. "I don't care about reputation or suitability or Judge Preston's son. Margaret, I'm lonely." "Ethan, I've been lonely my entire life until I walked into this cabin. Until your children looked at me like I mattered for who I am, not what I have." She stepped closer. "Until you looked at me the same way. You deserve better than a man who values my mind, who lets his children love me without condition, who looks at me and sees me." She was crying now. "I have everything except what matters. You have nothing except everything I need." Ethan crossed the distance between them, pulled her into the cabin, into his arms. She was cold and shaking and absolutely certain. "I love you," he said against her hair. "God help me. I have nothing to offer but yourself." "Offer me yourself." From the loft, a whisper. "Sam, come look." 2 small heads appeared at the railing. Sophie's face split into a smile that could light the whole territory. "It's a Christmas miracle," she breathed. Margaret laughed and cried at the same time. The twins scrambled down the ladder and wrapped around both of them. The 4 of them stood in a tangle by the decorated tree. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan's cabin felt like home, outside. Church bells began to ring for midnight mass. Inside, a new family was being born. Christmas morning, they walked to the Hartley mansion together, not sneaking, not apologizing, walking in full daylight down Main Street while half the town pretended not to stare. Margaret held Ethan's hand. The twins walked between them, Sophie on Margaret's other side, Sam holding tight to Ethan's sleeve. They looked like a family. They felt like one. Mrs. Henderson paused on the church steps, whispered to Mrs. Pyle behind her gloved hand. Mr. Greaves stopped loading his wagon to watch. Let them watch. James Hartley answered his own door. Saw them standing together on his porch, and his face went hard. Margaret. I'm marrying Ethan Crawford, father, New Year's Day. If he'll have me. Ethan's hand tightened on hers. She squeezed back. You'll be disinherited. Hartley's voice was flat. Then I'll teach school. Ethan will build. We'll manage. Margaret's voice didn't shake. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you. Hartley looked at Ethan. You have nothing to offer her. No, sir. Ethan met his eyes. I can't give her wealth. Can't give her comfort or security or an easy life. But I can give her partnership. Respect. A family that needs her not for her money but for herself. He paused. That's a richer offer than Judge Preston's son will make. Sophie stepped forward. Small and serious and 7 years old. Mr. Hartley, Miss Margaret taught me to read. She makes us bread. She loves us. Sophie's voice was clear. Isn't that what family does? The silence stretched. James Hartley looked at his daughter, saw her radiant, certain, more alive than she'd been in years. Saw the twins gazing at her with uncomplicated adoration. Saw Crawford, poor but dignified, offering not a transaction but a life. Hartley's shoulders sagged. New Year's Day is hasty. We're certain, Margaret said. Another long silence. Then, I'll pay for the wedding, a small one. And Margaret. He looked at his daughter. You're not disinherited, but you'll earn your own way, build your own life. Understood. Understood. Margaret's voice broke. She released Ethan's hand and embraced her father. Hartley stood stiff for a moment. Then his arms came up around her. Your mother would have liked him, he said quietly. She always said you needed someone who'd argue philosophy with you. Walking back down the hill. Margaret took Ethan's hand again. The twins ran ahead, throwing snowballs, laughing for the first time in days. We did it, Margaret said. You did it. We did it. She looked at him. Together. The way we'll do everything from now on. From the church, carolers were singing. The words drifted across the snow. Peace on earth. Goodwill to men. Ethan thought of the 17 cents still in his tin box. Thought of thin stew and worn shoes and the endless struggle that lay ahead. Thought of Margaret beside him, the twins running ahead of them, and the community that had witnessed their stand. It would be hard, but they wouldn't be alone. Merry Christmas, he said. Margaret smiled. Merry Christmas. New Year's Day, 1886. The church was full. Margaret wore her mother's wedding dress, ivory silk turned cream with age, but still beautiful. Ethan wore his only suit, mended by Margaret's hand the night before. Sam and Sophie stood as witnesses, scrubbed clean and solemn with importance. Reverend Peters spoke the words. Ethan's voice was steady, saying, I do. Margaret's was clear and certain. They kissed. And the congregation clapped. Mrs. Henderson wiped her eyes. Mr. Greaves nodded approval. James Hartley sat in the front pew, face unreadable but present. The reception was at the cabin. The town brought food casseroles and bread and pies. Mrs. Henderson presented a wedding quilt, pieced in a log cabin pattern. Mr. Greaves brought firewood stacked in the wagon. Even Judge Preston's son, passing through on his way back to Denver, stopped to offer congratulations and seemed relieved rather than offended. The community that had gossiped now celebrated. People filled the small cabin, spilled onto the porch, gathered in the yard. They'd witnessed Margaret's choice and recognized it as validation she could have had wealth and chose this. Instead, therefore, this must be valuable. By evening, everyone had left except the four of them. Ethan added wood to the fire. Margaret unpacked her trunk, mostly books, which made him smile. Sophie and Sam helped arrange them on the workshop shelves Ethan had built the week before. "You promised me the finest bookshelves in Wyoming," Margaret said. "I'm working on it." 3 weeks later, late January, the cabin had transformed, not through wealth, but through partnership. Ethan's workshop now held teaching materials. 3 afternoons each week, Tuesdays, Thursdays. Saturdays, the cabin became a schoolroom. Margaret taught any child in Millstone who wanted to learn. Sam and Sophie helped the younger ones with letters. Ethan built small desks and chairs from scrap lumber. The town paid what it could. Mrs. Henderson brought eggs. Mr. Greaves credited Ethan's lumber account. James Hartley donated primers and slates for the community's benefit. They were managing, barely, but together, evenings. The 4 of them gathered by lamplight. Sophie read aloud from Little Women, voice growing more confident each night. Sam worked arithmetic problems, tongue between his teeth in concentration. Margaret graded slates. Ethan carved wooden letters for the youngest students. Occasionally, Margaret and Ethan's eyes would meet across the pages. A private language, a shared understanding. The knowledge that they'd chosen this, the struggle and the joy inseparable. February thaw came early. The snow began to melt. One Sunday after church, Ethan and Margaret stood at the window, the same window where the twins had once pressed their faces in, longing. The Christmas pine, replanted outside in January, showed tiny green buds at the branch tips. Spring coming, life returning. Margaret leaned against Ethan's shoulder, through the window. They could see Main Street, the miller's house where this had all started. The general store where people still gossiped, but now with warmth instead of judgment. The bank where James Hartley managed accounts and, occasionally, stopped by the cabin to discuss philosophy with his daughter. "Do you regret it?" Margaret asked. The struggle. Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist. "Every day I wake up with you is easier than any day I woke up alone." She turned in his arms, kissed him. The twins were outside, building a snowman in the melting snow, their laughter drifting through the glass. "We're building something," Margaret said. "Not just us, the whole town. One child learning to read at a time. You're building it. We're building it." She smiled. "I finally understand what Mother meant when she told me education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. We're giving these children something permanent." Through the window, Sophie was trying to teach the Miller children how to spell their names in the snow with sticks. Sam was explaining arithmetic using snowballs. The community's children. Learning from children who'd once been hungry and isolated and poor. The cycle breaking, the pattern changing. Ethan looked at the replanted pine. Green buds emerging from winter-dead branches. Looked at his wife framed by lamplight and books. Looked at his children teaching others in melting snow. The tree they couldn't afford to buy had taken root, and so had they not in prosperity, but in something deeper. A home built not from timber and nails, but from words and patience and the quiet certainty that the richest inheritance is a willing heart. Outside, spring was coming. Inside, they'd already arrived.